Today I'll be reading Chapter 7 of The Art of Walk. Chapter 7. Your Magnum Opus. What legacy looks like. Life isn't significant except for its impact on other lives. Jackie Robinson. Your calling is not a job. It is your entire life. I'm not sure what I was expecting visiting my friend Mud Hut in the middle of Africa, but this was not it. I was not expecting hope. Is this where you live? Our guide asked the little girl as we marched up the dirt path to her home. Otherwise stoic, her attitude is brightened as we reached the top of the hill and were greeted by her parents. At least we thought they were her parents. Sam, the man of the house, was quick to correct his misunderstanding. 9-year-old Kevin was his sister-in-law. He and his wife Christine took her in after her mother disappeared. The mother suffered from some form of mental illness and had the unfortunate habit of abandoning her children, so they decided to raise Kevin as their own. And when you ask them about this or praise their kindness, they get embarrassed. 3 study mud huts with thatched roofs made up the family's home. One was a kitchen, and the other 2 were bedrooms. As we toured the premise, I noticed each building was well kept, the floors neatly swept, and things put away where they belong. There was a familiar order to the place, a pattern that felt like home. They were modest people, but you could tell how they take great pride in what they have, especially Christine. Life was tough for them, no question about it. In the past years, the couple had lost twin baby boys, a wound they were still healing. Their son, Augustine, was deaf and they didn't have access to opportunities like specialized schooling that would certainly make life easier. Sam was born to a poor farming family in Lyra, Uganda, which is located in the northern part of the country where a civil war ravaged the land for 2 decades. Despite his parents' limited means, they gave him a plot of land on which he began farming and raising his family. It's rare to see a man stay after the kids come. One of the trip leaders told me, men in that culture tend to leave once children come into the picture, but Sam was not that kind of man. After we visited the family for a while, Sam showed me a small shop on the side of a nearby road, where he sold small items like bags of cooking oil and matches. I promptly peppered him with questions. How much do you make off of each item? What is your profit margin? When can you order new inventory? He knew all the answers. I even asked if he had a goal of how much money he wanted to make. This, I've learned, is a question most people don't know the answer to, and one that leads to true success. You have to have a goal to know where you're going. In order to get there, it seems obvious, but so many people chase after a dream without any idea of what they are really trying to achieve. But Sam was different. 5 million, he said without hesitation. That's how much money he needed to make to send his son to a special needs school and build a house that wasn't made of mud. Without trying to seem too conspicuous, I pulled out my phone and ordered the calculator app. Doing a quick currency conversion, it equaled $2,000. I think you will meet your goal, Sam, I said, smiling. His family had to walk 2 miles every day to get clean drinking water. They didn't have electricity or any modern conveniences. They cooked all their meals over a fire and lived off of less than a few dollars a day. Yet all around his home were plants like sorghum and mango trees, life-giving fruits and vegetables and grains that ensured his family would not go hungry. Sam was doing more than subsisting. He was working hard to not only make ends meet, but to improve his life and create a future for his children. When we said goodbye to the man with the infectious smile, I realized how wealthy he was. Poverty and wealth are concepts that cannot be defined merely by what you have or make. It's the lawyer who makes 450,000 a year and spends $500,000 rich. Are his habits sustainable? What about the mom I met a couple of years ago in the slums of Guatemala, who sweeps her house clean every morning before going to work in the market so she can send her kids to school? Is she poor? I don't say this to make light of those who live on next to nothing, nor do I want to minimize the luxury from which I am able to write this. But I have learned, not from the suburbs but from the slums, is that poverty is more than a context. It's a mindset. I have met rich people in some of the poorest parts of the planet, and I have met bankrupt people living in million-dollar homes. Some isn't going to be poor, if we can even call him that, for long. He has the opportunity, the means, and the will to change his life. His demeanor was different from the vibe I got entering the slums of Kampala. That was a different kind of poverty. There was little hope there, but in some's eye, I saw something I wanted, something powerful and infectious. His dream was not for him, it was for his family, and that gave me hope. If some can find meaning and motivation in rural Uganda, with nothing more than a hoe to farm and a shack to start a business, then what's stopping you and me with all the tools at our disposal? How do we take a calling, however extraordinary or ordinary it may seem, and do as some has done? How do we turn our work into something generous? Our circumstances rarely dictate what we can do with our lives. And that man who was making a life for himself and his loved ones in the African bush taught me more than any millionaire ever could. For him, the work is both the means and the end to a better life. He's doing what he loves and doing it for the people he loves. Success isn't about you. I always thought pursuing a dream was about you, that it was inherently selfish, but I couldn't have been more wrong. I wasn't until I got everything I wanted in life that I realized none of it was for me. I think it's time that I move on, I told my boss of 7 years, who had mentored me for much of that time. He immediately sat up in his chair, looking at me, not saying a word. I think it's time. The man is there, the family spot is there, my passion is there. The only thing that will keep me from doing this is, I wouldn't want to disappoint you. For a moment, he just stared at me without saying anything. Then he finally spoke up. Jeff, I'm not disappointed in you. I'm proud of you. In fact, I've been waiting for this conversation. I've seen this coming for a while. It's about time you went off and did something on your own. A few months later, I began working for myself. That's when the really hard work began. Before leaving my job, I had saved up enough money to live on for at least 6 months, if not a year, but that would have been really stretching it. The idea was to not have to worry about income for a while so that I wouldn't be stressed the first month on the job. I always wanted to be able to make my time building a business, but there was just one problem. With having all that savings, I wasn't motivated to work. After seeing work as a means of making a paycheck for so many years, I didn't have a good reason to go to work when money was no longer an issue. For a couple of months, I really struggled with motivation. With knowing why I should be working, this lack of motivation turned into laziness, which devolved into depression. If I didn't need to work, what did I need to do, and why? Eventually, I did go back to work, but with different intentions. During my 2-month funk, I called my friend Stu, who owns a successful software company, to ask how he dealt with motivation. Jeff said, I live in a small town and my standard of living hasn't really changed since I started working for myself. At a time when he was starting to make more money than he would ever need, Stu went on a trip to Africa, and his eyes were opened to a whole new world of possibility. In Kenya, he saw how much of a difference opportunity and a good education could make in a person's life. He realized that instead of feeling guilty, he could use the gift he was born with, some of which he didn't earn or deserve, to help other people. After that, I realized I was good at making money and I didn't need to feel bad about that. I could do what I do best and use it for good. When I returned home, I started working not for myself but for all those people I met in Africa. A few years later, I had a similar experience, having raised enough money through my blog to help build an income-generating workshop for women living in a leper camp just outside of Mombasa, Kenya. Work, it seems, was never meant to be something we do just to make a living. It was meant to be a means of making a difference in our own lives and in the lives of others. The problem today is that many of us see our jobs just as a duty, something we're obligated to do to pay the bills, or we see it as a means of improving our lives, making so much money we can buy all the things I've ever wanted. But neither option will satisfy. This me-first way of looking at vocation doesn't work. When you look around at the world, you see a curious trend in the lives of some billionaires and movie stars. They aren't content to simply savor the fruit of their labor, but neither do they let their largesse lead to unproductive guilt. They understand that feeling guilty in and of itself doesn't accomplish anything. Instead, they are using their resources and influence to improve other people's lives, leveraging their connections and celebrity, understanding that people will listen to them. They're trying to do something good. A few generations ago, men went to work or war and rarely got to see life beyond their careers. A generation ago, our parents had to answer the question of what they would do with the last thought of their lives. How would they spend their retirement? Would it be squandered on silly things or invested in significance? But now, the question of legacy isn't a matter of if you live long enough or when you retire. It's a matter of what you will do with what you have right now. You don't have to earn a living for 30 years to turn around and spend the next 30 giving it away. If significance is what matters to you, you can structure your life and walk in a way that allows you to live your legacy now. In fact, your giving doesn't have to be a byproduct of your success. It can be the very thing that drives it in the first place. We are your symphony. In the film Mr. Holland's opus, Glenn Holland, it's a frustrated music teacher trying to compose a masterwork in the margins of life. He never succeeds, at least not in the ways he hoped. Every time he gets close to completing his symphony, some new complication arrives, and his work must be put on hold. A touring musician on sabbatical, Mr. Holland takes the open music instructor position at a high school because he thinks it will give him more time to compose. But as the demands of the job increase and the pressures from home build, he realized how wrong he was. Over the course of his teaching career, which he thought would only be a temporary commitment to pay some bills, he inspires students to continue playing music, struggles to be a good dad and faithful husband. The battles a stubborn school board that ultimately has him fired, all while slowly picking away at his composition. When Glenn learns his son is deaf, he realizes Cole will never be able to appreciate music the same way he does. In one scene, the two get in a fight where the father tells his son that he is sad because John Lennon was just shot and that Cole wouldn't understand. Most of Mr. Holland's life is full of moments like this, scenes of frustration where he feels misunderstood or simply overlooked, as if he's the only one with dreams bigger than his life can contain. By the end of the movie, Mr. Holland is a cynical old man, tired of school board bureaucracy and resigned to the fact that in spite of his dreams, he will never be a master composer. After his last day of school, his family is escorting him to the exit. When he hears music coming from the gymnasium, curious, he opens the doors to an auditorium full of hundreds of students, teachers, and alumni, all gathered to wish him well and celebrate the impact he had on their lives. In the crowd, he sees many familiar faces, including one apathetic student who used to challenge his authority. Another former student, Gertrude Lung, who is now the state governor, acts as MC and welcomes everyone, explaining how Mr. Holland had an impact on her life, as he has done for everyone in the auditorium. Then she remarks on how Holland feels like he has misspent a great part of his life. Rumor had it, she says, he was always working on this symphony of his, and this was going to make him famous, rich, probably both. But Mr. Holland isn't rich, and he isn't famous, at least not outside of his little town. Then she looks at the man who was her favorite teacher and says, Mr. Holland, we are... Shit. Sorry. I'm a teacher, so this line gets me. We are your symphony. Gertrude then asks him to come on stage as the curtains pull back to reveal a full orchestra band ready to play an American Symphony by Glenn Holland. With tears in his eyes, he conducts the symphony he spent 3 decades of his life composing, an effort he thought had been lost forever. It is a moment of clarity for both the audience and the protagonist. A man who felt he had missed his calling, that he had wasted his life on a pursuit less significant, and he was wrong. Sometimes all the little things in life aren't interruptions to our calling. They are the most important part. Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. John Lennon wrote in a song to his son Sean, we see this come true in Mr. Holland's life, as he can now see the full picture of his calling, understanding that every frustration had a purpose, and that when he felt farthest from his true reason for living, he was actually much closer than he realized. Life has a funny way of teaching us that sometimes the most important stuff is the ordinary stuff. The smallest moments, the ones we think are insignificant, are the ones we will cherish the most. As you endeavor to do something amazing with your life, don't forget that without people to support your dream, your work will always be incomplete. A life filled with achievements and accolades, but lacking those people necessary to celebrate those moments, is not much of a life at all. In your pursuit of a worthwhile vocation, you will be tempted to rush past 3 times. These are the moments you get interrupted by a colleague at the water cooler, or when your toddler texts you on your pen leg when you have just one more email to send. These are the times when you get distracted, when the whole world seems to be plotting against your productivity, but there is often a purpose in these moments to remind you that a calling is more than a career. It is a life lived well, and the very things you try to avoid are what you need the most to make the story matter. I used to think that your calling was about doing something good in this world. Now I understand it's about becoming someone good and letting that goodness impact the world around you, which means you won't fully appreciate the whole story you are living until the end. But for now, if you are intentional and willing to appreciate the fact that you don't see the whole narrative, you can enjoy more of the journey. Now I become myself. What kind of writer do you want to be? My friend Marion asked me. I didn't know what to say. Should I say Salinger or Shakespeare? Maybe pick someone a little more contemporary, a little more successful. What was the right answer? I was unsure. The truth was I wanted to be like a lot of different writers, but what I really wanted to was what they had, fame, talent, and money. But those are lousy things to wish for when someone asks you what kind of writer you want to be. So I had to think of something more thoughtful to say. Even if you want those things, you suddenly can say so out loud. We all have too many choices in this world. Freedom is a great thing, but freedom without restriction can be paralyzing. When it comes to vocation, we need some boundaries as well, parameters that allows us to focus. The good news is that the path to your life's work is already laid out for you. It has been there since the beginning of your life, and it's quite different from that of your friends or those famous people you admire. When we talk about finding a calling, we are not just seeking an activity, we are looking for an identity, an understanding of who we are. We want to be complete, to make sense of the story of our lives, but whether we recognize it or not, this quest we've been talking about is not just a physical one. It's a spiritual one. It is, in a way, a journey of becoming. Now I become myself, May Sarton wrote. It's taken time, many years and places. I have been dissolved and shaken, worn other people's faces. We all do this on occasion. We spend too much time pretending to be someone else. We try to recreate a life we admire instead of the one we were born for. We vainly expend energy and effort on pursuits that are bound for failure, all because we are afraid of being our true selves. But the lucky ones discover a different path, or rather they forge one where there was no way, departing from expectation in order to become who they are. To be called is not enough. You must become your calling, a choice that happens only if you make it. Why do so few people do this? What's really at stake here? As with any journey, there is risk and danger, the likelihood of failure, and most would rather play it safe than be rejected by their friends or fall on their faces for the world to see. So they live lives of safety and relative obscurity, focusing on the things they enjoy and they are praised for instead of daring to do something great. And time creeps in, taunting those who did not live. Ezra Pound aptly wrote, "Such people, and the days are not full enough, and the nights are not full enough, and life slips by like a field mouse, not shaking the grass." That feeling you feel when you see a great movie or read a powerful story, you know that itch. It's telling you there is more to life in you yet to be lived. Ancient myths and legends speak to this. Every hero's journey included some sacred task that culminated in deeper understanding of who they were born to be. And how was this done? Through a personal quest, some great feat that required every talent, skill, and strength they could muster. In other words, they had to walk. Every day and I faced a choice to either pursue our authentic selves or a shadow of the real thing. We either do what is expected of us, or we listen to that voice of intuition deep inside, promising something more significant. And as we pick up our hammers and scalpels, as we sit down in front of our laptops or climb on board the bus for another tour, as we endeavor to do meaningful work in the world, we are becoming ourselves. We are, as Viktor Frankl wrote, looking for a reason to be happy. Fulfillment isn't just for the elite few who find a purpose for life. It's for everyone, and that potential exists, and in each and every one of you. You have everything you need to be your whole self. It's already in you. Now you just have to become it. A true calling is something new or shiny. Often, it's something old and predictable. A familiar face that's easily taken for granted, an old habit or hobby that comes back into our lives. It's our true self, shared with the world. But sometimes, it takes a wake-up call for us to see that this work that we're doing is more significant than we realize. Classroom teacher Gloria Strongs learned this lesson one day when she took some time off. I've hired a substitute for the next 2 days. The principal told her, I want you to visit the homes of each of your children. You need stay only 10 minutes in each home. Then she added, you won't find fathers at home because many of them are in prison. I just want you to understand your students. Gloria never intended to be a teacher of small children. Her husband was a graduate student and she needed a job. So she took the only position available as the head of a class of 47 third graders. Her visit to the children's homes was nothing short of incredible. The homes were shacks with dirt floors. The children slept on those floors or in some car seat from the junkyard. Here is her recollection. The mother spoke poorly and seemed frightened to have me visit. I returned to school, amazed that my student could learn as well as they did, and recognizing the fine teaching that had occurred earlier, so that now each of these children could read at least a mid-second grade level. Those teachers had been the most important adults in the lives of the children, and now I was one of them. Gloria's feeling of ingratitude was replaced with a deep sense of honor. She went from resenting her job to embracing it. Sometimes a calling is simply accepting your role in a story that is bigger than you. So when my friend asked what kind of writer I want to be, I said the most natural thing that came to mind. I want to be the kind of writer I'm supposed to be. Missing the call. The easiest way to miss your calling is to ignore the call. Maybe it feels too risky. Or maybe you feel too old and silly chasing a dream that now seems out of reach. We keep putting off studying for someday, which never comes. This is common, and we tend to excuse our lack of action, even rationalizing it to each other. Most people find themselves in careers that do anything but inspire them. And this can lead to complacency. Why would I take such a risk? My friends and family members aren't. Doing so would make me weird, maybe even alienate me from those who love me. And so they don't ever find the time, and sadly they died with their song still in them. As Oliver Wendell Holmes once wrote, another way to miss your calling is to treat it as an event instead of a lifestyle. Remember, your vocation is more of a magnum opus than a single masterpiece. It's an entire body of work, not a single piece. You will spend your life creating it, and if you stop too soon or don't see your entire life as a means of accomplishing that task, you could miss it. Recently, over lunch, while we were discussing the topic of calling and purpose, a friend said, maybe my purpose in life was to simply raise my daughters, and they're going to do something great. Maybe that's all I was meant to do, and my purpose is now fulfilled, and everything else is just gravy. I would be okay with that. He's onto something in that he sees his purpose as something that is bigger than him, a task he was born to accomplish that will send ripples into eternity. But your calling is not a single event in your life. It's a whole body of work you make, including your job, your relationships, and the legacy you leave behind. If you see it as something other than that, you may stop short of the goal. You can, in fact, not live up to your potential. Maybe you answered the call, but at some point give up. You started down the road, but decided to retire or settle. And at some point, you let go. You settled for good when you were called to greatness. In the movie Finding Forrester, Sean Connery plays a writer in his latter years of life. A recluse confined to his home who doesn't care much for visitors. This doesn't bode well for the young college student who tracks him down in search of a mentor. At first, Forrester dismisses the young man. In fact, he casts him out and chases him away. But eventually, the two become friends, and the young man finds his way in life, largely due to the mentorship. At the very end of the story, the old man realizes that although he wrote a best-selling novel years ago, his purpose wasn't over once he achieved a surprising amount of fame. The same is true for us and the way we pursue our callings. Success isn't the goal, legacy is. Ultimately, we are called to call others. We are given gifts to be given away. All that to say, when you find yourself at the pinnacle of personal greatness, you may just be getting started. The lesson of Stephen King's desk. Stephen King wrote in his memoir that for years he approached his craft wasted, treating his vocation as competition with the rest of life. At the pinnacle of his success and in the depths of his addiction, he bought a desk, a possession he had always dreamed of. The desk was the sort of massive oak slab that would dominate a room. He placed it in the middle of his study, where he tirelessly want to walk every day. After getting sober with the intervention of his family, King got rid of the huge desk and replaced it with a smaller one, which he put in the corner of his office instead of in the center of the room. His children would regularly come up to the office, which was now more a living room than a retreat center, to watch sports games and movies and to eat pizza. He never complained. What he learned from this tale of two desks is his struggle with an addiction that nearly cost him. His family was that life isn't a support system for art. It's the other way around. This was what Sam in Uganda reminded me of, and what Jody Marberry did so well for his family. Life is not an inconvenience to the walk we dream of. It's the reason we do it in the first place. A calling does not complete with or even complement your life. Complement your life. Yes. Your life, one lived well, becomes your calling, your magnum opus. And, just like Mr. Holland, we won't appreciate this until the end. Several years ago, I wrote a list of dreams and goals with dates assigned to each. On that list, at the 10-year mark was the goal: write and publish a book. A year later, the goal was realized. After a year of late nights and early mornings, of fighting with my wife about when I would come to bed, and often breaking that promise, of countless misunderstandings with colleagues and arguments over where my allegiance lay, and 300 days of doubting myself, I had finally done it. I'd written a book, and I was proud. When the big day arrived, nothing went right. Visiting the local Barnes and Nobles, I failed to find a single copy of my book on the shelves. Within a few hours, Amazon ran out of its short supply, and people I had told to go buy the book were telling me they couldn't find it anywhere. Embarrassed and feeling sorry for myself, I left the house to run some errands and to get a drink with a friend. We were supposed to be celebrating, but instead I wanted to commiserate. A few hours later, he dropped me off at my house. Crossing the threshold, I stepped into a house full of people who shouted, "Surprise!" My wife had thrown me a party with 20 of my closest friends. After walking around greeting and thanking everyone, I reached for a cupcake and saw on our dining room table a small white envelope with a card inside. The card, which was from my wife, said it was never a question of if. It was always a matter of when. She, who had pledged to me to be my biggest fan, had been rooting for me from the very beginning. As you strive to achieve your life's work, be careful of at what cost you chase it. It will be easy to resent those closest to you, to make your biggest supporters into your worst enemies. To hoard your walk away from the rest of life, you may be tempted to see every relationship not as a lifeline, but as a competing force, something to be mistrusted. And in doing this, you may destroy the things that could save you. Consumed by the calling, I often wonder about my grandfather, who was a journalist, artist, and alcoholic for much of his life. A talented pianist and playwright, Grandpa was a man I admired, a deep thinker, a complex character full of frustration and sometimes unexplained sadness. There is much about that man that is still a mystery. But one thing I do know is that surrounded by the books he loved, with eyes full of regret, he died at the hands of his addiction, jaundiced and glassy-eyed, staring at me with a softness I will never forget. He gripped my hand and smiled. A few days later, his major organs completely shut down, and he was gone. I have no doubt that my grandfather was called to be an artist, but I also know that for a season of life, he let his calling consume him. So whenever I snap at my wife or lose patience with my son, I try to remember this and that. Stephen King wrote, quote, "Life is not a support system for your walk. Your walk is a support system for your life. No amount of success is worth losing the ones you love the most. I am still learning this. Stay swallowing my pride and ambition, and learning to move my desk out from the middle of the room. Each time I take the day off to go to the zoo with my family, I don't regret it. Every time I close the laptop to watch a movie with my wife or get up with my son in the middle of the night before a speaking gig, I remember these are not interruptions to the call. They are the most significant parts of the process. There is an old episode of The Simpsons in which Homer leaves his despised job at the nuclear power plant to pursue his dream of working at a bowling alley. When he hears news around the town that his wife is pregnant and that he won't be able to support his family, he is forced to return to the power plant, where his former boss, Mr. Barnes, make him beg for his job back. To further humiliate him, Mr. Burns places a plaque of Homer's office that says, "Don't forget, you are here forever." But by the end of the episode, Homer has taken all the pictures of his daughter, Maggie, and taped them to the plaque so that it now reads, "Do it for her." In the journey toward our callings, there will be roadblocks and inconveniences, setbacks and slowdowns that we may mistake for distractions, when in fact they are as much part of a calling as the job itself. Right now, a good friend is in the middle of realizing this as he transitions from a career as a teacher to a new job. As a financial advisor, at first, he resented the fact that he was going to have to leave his job, which he loved, so that his wife could stay home to raise their kids. It felt like selling out and giving up a dream for something that paid the bills. But as he spent the greater part of a year wrestling over the decision, he realized that any good dream is one worth sharing, and sometimes worth sacrificing. For others, this doesn't mean we need to give up on our deepest belongings, but it does mean that a calling is about more than me. When I was in Africa, I asked the Ugandan farmer Sam what he and his family did for fun. Looking around at his surroundings, I noticed there wasn't much and knew that summers were hot there. What did they do all the day long when they weren't farming or fetching water? As soon as I asked the question, Sam frowned. Then he shook his head. The translator repeated the question. He shook his head again and confused. "You know," I repeated. "Fun like? What do you do when you're not walking?" He nodded as the translation came through. Then thought for a moment and finally spoke. "We do everything together, and to us, it is fun." Tomorrow I'll be reading the conclusion of this book, The Work is Never Done. So, please like, subscribe, and follow so that I can keep on reading books every day until I have achieved something new for everyone who followed me. Okay? I'm pushing forward in my life so that I can do something more for all of you. So keep pushing for the people around you, for the people that you love, for the ones that follow your dreams. Keep pushing yourself. Learn something new. Be the guy that provides something of valuable to the people that love you. This is Daniel. See you in the next one.